Joan Baez has a beautiful voice in America, held the attention of a generation, but behind the wall of fame relationships with famous people like Apple and Bob Dylan and shows with Martin Luther King Jr., a darker truth was starting to take hold. 83. The famous folk artist has switched concerts that sold out for therapy and silence for the tree's branches, which she calls the counselor. She lives alone and in peace, talking to plants that are sleeping in a getting into the treehouse and facing the ghosts of a broken youth by at the hands of she used to look up to her father. It's a beautiful deeply sad turn in the plot of a woman who used to sing for justice and is just now starting to face her own. Joan Baez's story began a long time before she hit the stage for her first show of her Albert Baez, My Dad, Was Very Smart Scientist, who helped make X-rays under the microscope while he was still at. However, what made him stand out was it wasn't just his brains that were out. A strong sense of right and wrong. During the Cold War he turned down jobs that looked good because he didn't work in defense rather than work on guns. He took on less busy, less well-paying work at Joan would work with universities and UNESCO to then say, we'll never have all the things that are nice but not vital that little girls want as they grow up. Instead we would have a father who of duty. This promise to doing the right thing would become a Joan's own impact. As a child the family moved around a lot. One of the most notable stops was Baghdad. Her dad helped get science set up classes at the college for only 10. Joan, who was 17 years old, was thrown into a world of big differences in how I remembered getting there in the busy heat and chaos, and seeing a beggar get police beat up right at the airport. After that, she saw people for months digging through trash while kids play the streets and animals being abused. During that time, she read Watt and Frank and was sick a lot for years. In the end, she would look back and say, our little souls saw the same things, but came to different views on my own. That year's wait stuck with her. Really made her see things and grow. Helpful when she got back to Joan in California began to notice other wrong things going on around her, even though she was born in New York, but her Mexican background made her feel like she didn't fit at school. Some kids said she wasn't a stupid Mexican, totally fit in with the Mexican kids because she didn't speak Spanish. It helped to be stuck between two worlds. Make her more aware of what is right and wrong. He was brown and not welcome, she said. I knew there were bigger problems, though. For black people, this realization would affect the choices she made later, such when she turned down gigs for white people in the South and picked instead to play at black schools even if it meant putting her job at risk. A strong new impact came in. Joan became a Quaker when she was the age of 8, her family became Quakers. People who are known for their deep promise to work for peace and justice values quickly became her own. I thought I heard someone talking at dinner about war, peace, and right and wrong when she was 15. She listened to a Martin Luther King Jr. speech that made her cry. Not long after she refused to take part in a Cold War era there was a school raid drill that active she was in the local news for being rebellious. And was the start of her involvement in something magical happened in the summer of 1959 took place at the first Newport Folk Fest. A girl named Joan who is 18 years old Baez who doesn't have a record deal or any fame walked out on stage naked with her. She used a borrowed guitar to sing 2 songs. Bob Gibson is a folk singer. That short time changed everything for her. Voice was clear and high like nothing else the crowd had ever heard. Left everyone in shocked quiet. All of a sudden this unknown teenager was the name everyone talked about. Big names like Pete Seeger and Bo Diddley had played that night, but the talk about Joan wouldn't stop. About record companies rushed to sign her. She went on to sing at Newport for decades, even when she was in her 80s. Was that one lucky night in 1959 that made her famous. Just after a year, at age 19, Joan made her first record in a strange place, a rundown hall in the Manhattan Towers in New York. She sat on a hotel bed, which wasn't very fancy. A dirty mat with only 2 mics. Try not to be while recording board games were being held there at the same time. Wednesdays didn't have any big shows. It was just her voice and her guitar, but that the sound of pure honesty turned into something. Even though it didn't do well on the charts far away, the album finally got to number 15 and stayed there for to sign with a nearly 3 years instead of big name like Columbia. Joan picked a less important Vanguard Records because they told her she could be creative for years. After some time, the Library of Congress would call that was a very important song history of records in the United States. Before the events and records, Joan had been to building her security slowly at a Cambridge has a small club called Club 47. Near Harvard when she first did it. The room was almost empty, and she felt scared, but there was things people would never forget about her. She seemed a little strange. Strange within weeks the crowd soon there were lines going down. She used to make $10 a night on the street. To $25, which was a lot for a coffee house singer on that small stage in 1959, became her test site where she changed her voice and how she was seen in while people around them couldn't look. Take away the picture that followed her from back then, Madonna was often seen without shoes. Started at Newport, where she sang without. It was more than just a funny pair of shoes. Detail that her bare feet came to stand for her innocence, her fight against the smooth, fake side of the music business. People thought she was a saint even though she didn't want to be. She once said, "I am not a saint, I am a noise." As time went on, that push to be ideal weighed on her, but she was in her 80s. Joan felt calm, so she danced barefoot in Paris, not because of the crowds but just for herself, finally free to be the person she wanted to be. In 1961 once more, everything changed when Joan went into a club in Greenwich Village and saw a scruffy young man named Bob Dylan act. She was already well known while he wasn't there, but when she heard him sing a song to Woody was deeply moved, and his voice was his words were rough, but they were powerful. In later words, she said it broke. It was that beautiful to her on the inside. Soon after, a stronger link formed. At a party where Dylan played with this song, God on Our Side, changed Joan's life. How she saw him, she knew he was not only had ability, but he was something much bigger. During the next a few years ago, Joan used her fame to help Dylan's rise. In 1963 she asked him to perform with her at the Newport Folk Festival in front of 10,000 people. In the crowd didn't pay attention at first welcome him, but she had faith. She took him on tour with her because she liked him. Gave him stage time and brought his songs to a huge number of people. During one show in Queens, she more than half of what she did to it was her fans who heard her singing Dylan's songs. Many people agree with what Bobby Dylan says. People my age feel but can't say. They both spoke at the March on Washington that happened at the same time as Martin MLK's well-known, I Have a Dream, speech. It was clear that Dylan he is no longer just a musician. Had changed into the voice of the movement, partly because of Joan's help. However, his rise to fame was not easy. Dylan had been seeing her since 1965. Outgrown their relationship, he asked her to go on tour with him in the UK, but as soon as they got there, he kept her off. At one point, Joan found herself wandering behind the scenes, confused, and she was upset and couldn't figure out why he wouldn't let her act. At that time Dylan married someone else without planning to. A pregnant lady named Sarah with his child. Many years later, Joan, Dylan broke my heart. I was just captivated by that skill for him. The choice was easy. Sarah would fit in. He didn't want Joan to be in his life. Control instead of being with someone. Even though she was sad. In 1968, Joan released an entire record with Any Day Now is one of Dylan's songs. Picked the songs by spreading out his. She was shut down by sheet music on the floor. Eyes and picking them at random. 16 Some of the songs that were on the record are a number that Dylan had not yet recorded. What happened was that reviewers were very harsh. Praised her voice, especially her an eerie version of Tears of Rage she even made the record art herself. It wasn't just a record. How she thought about everything they had been through together and all that they had lost. Joan in the summer of 1963. Baez was only 22 years old when she showed up in front of a big crowd at the March on Washington. She sang, We Will Win just before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous, Joan had felt the need to have a dream speech. Bit of racism while she was growing up, Her dad was Mexican and her mom was Scottish, and his family had to deal with the bias that experience gave her fight for justice all their lives, but only for a few years before she got her big There Is Now a Break at the Newport Folk Festival. Her words could be heard all the way across the singing a song on the National Mall that would always be linked to her. The March on Washington brought a new name. About 250,000 people, most of it helped push them. Black Americans bring the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Joan's Voting Rights Act of 1965. Voice played a part in that turning point. Not only a singer but also a picture of music had the power to move people and change the next year. In March 1965, Joan took part in another famous protest, the From Selma to Montgomery. These marches came when things were calm. After Bloody Sunday, the protesters were viciously attacked by there were cops on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Joan, on the 54-mile walk with thousands of other people. Pictures of the trip to Montgomery from the time to show where she stands among the people on the march, talking, listening, and being of the last night before the big game, a protest at the state capitol of Alabama. She sang at a show called Stars for Freedom with singers like Nina Frank Belfont and Simone Tony Bennett. It was more than just a show. It was in the fall of that year, the Voting Rights Act was signed by Lyndon Johnson. Not only did she refuse to play at the places that required division in the early 1960s, many Southern schools didn't let black kids, and Joan refused to sing in places that stood for those rules. Instead, she picked to put on shows at historically black schools and schools. This was a brave move, bad for her job and even dangerous when they played at Miles College. She got to Alabama just in time for the police chief. Bull Connor was a controversial figure, ordering a lot of arrests in the Joan had a stay at one of the only hotel in the area that let both of them in. Martin has black and white friends. She didn't know Martin Luther King Jr. and his group. Just talk about how fair the world was for her. 1964, Joan Baez did something brave. Refused to pay 60% of her tax bill. She said the money would be used during the Vietnam War. This act became it was one of the first big. Sometimes people didn't pay their taxes during the war, others did what she did, and a movement began. But this didn't send her to. In 1967, her protests got louder and she went to jail. 2 times she was arrested for stopping the front door to a military base in Oakland, California, where her mother was with her. They were both locked up for more than a month. A lot of people thought this was a strong act of calm protest. By the early in the 1970s, a lot of people refused to pay. The war was paid for by taxes. Some even didn't pay their phone bills even though they knew that tax paid for the troops back then. In December 1972, Joan did a few braved. She went to North Vietnam, which was a war zone. With a group of peace activists, the goal was to bring Christmas cards to American prisoners and make people worry about freedom for people. But while they were there, the U.S. started dropping a lot of bombs. 11 days to fight over Hanoi. Joan stayed in a hotel safe while bombs went off, dropped above. She took notes on everything. Blasts destroy a playground where kids are playing. Service on Christmas Eve that had to be stopped after the fact that it was because of the blast. The first time she really thought about it, of her own death. That scene stayed with her for the rest of her life. Even before that trip, Joan was making in 1965, she used money for something bigger. From her singing career to begin the Center for the Study of Peace. She began it with her teacher Ira Sand Pearl and lived in Carmel Valley, California, but no one greeted them. People in the area were afraid. Hippies would come to the school and cause trouble. They tried to stop it through the law, but Joan didn't give. She quietly opened the school again in December. The school taught ideas from people like Gandhi, and kids who work hard taught them how to write, speak, and organize. It stayed in Carmel during peaceful protests Valley for 4 years and then moved to Palo Alto and later turned into the Resource Place in Santa Cruz for peace and nonviolence. During all of this, Joan kept talking out that she helped put out a full-page ad in big newspapers that it attacked the government of Vietnam cares about human rights abuse. She told them to stop are cruel and let people into their jails. Jane Fonda and other strangers didn't agree. stood up for the Vietnamese government and shared a message that was critical of Joan's deeds, and their fight shocked many. It showed that in the peace movement there could be big differences even between friends. Joan Baez was 50 years old in 1991. Years old, she wrote a strong letter to her folks. Thought she had been mistreated as a child by her father, denied it and held on to those memories were not real and had been put there by doctors. He said it was a false memory syndrome, but Joan wasn't sure about the exact information. Thought something had took place in a later video. You are never completely sure, he said. But it was enough, even if 20% was real, to cause as much damage as it did. She finally forgiven her dad after a lot of pain. Before he died near the end of 2007, she sang to him while he sat in. It was a quiet, emotional moment for him. Moment alone with him. Some of her pain that she wrote about and sang about. Along with that, she also had anxiety, depressive episodes, panic attacks, and terrible. It got so bad that even in bed when she was happy, she would quickly crash it. Phrase that felt like it would never end, she said. Her state of mind even hurt their relationship. She said, with her son Gabriel, I wasn't always there for him. I wasn't there, but it was there. The things got worse in the late 1970s and early 1980s. It got worse after the Vietnam War. Joan, she did drink because she felt lost. Said tequila made her feel like her new best friend. It began as a joke, but it turned into a story. The truth about outside forces, not inside strength, stopped her from abusing drugs. With therapy having begun early, and it was 1957, and she was only 16 years old. Told her parents she had many feelings, sad and having a strong sense of not being good enough. On the first visit, have been together for a long time with. She saved money on therapy over the years, a lot of cassette tapes from therapy, records of her meetings where she tried to make sense of her life. For decades she kept making music, and in 1970, she put out One Day at a Time is a record that shocked a lot of people. Recorded it in a country music. Bradley's Barn is a studio in Tennessee, marked the start of her journey into country music. This didn't come out of the blue for her. David Harris, in love with his wife at the time, he had a great voice and liked country music. Was against the Vietnam War and in jail for refusing to fight while he was there, while Baez was locked up, and made the album, which were made in the same style as David's. Another song with a country sound. She wrote about how much she loved Sweet Sir Galahad. For David and her sister Mimi to show her husband a different side of. She wrote songs for a few years. Baez had already taken another creative take, a chance with classical music. This time from 1966 to 1968, she worked with Paul Schickel, a musician who was also known to play the funny PDQ Bach. They made 3 very different things together. The first Noel record was a Christmas song album with classic songs on it, set up with a full choir, more carefully thought out path, showing she wasn't afraid to be different from the crowd. In 1974, she made one more, this time, make a bold move into another Thank You, Olvida, for the language she freed record with almost all Spanish songs. It was important to time it right. Just months before, the Chilean folk artist Victor Jara died in battle with the new army. The government of Baez wanted to honor him and some people like him. Even though Spanish wasn't her first language, she sang from the heart and skill that they can even play the songs live. Then came the song that would make her famous career. It all began with a shock. Dylan shared in a 1974 phone call from the words to his new song, Lily Rosemary, and the Jack of, and wrote gems and rust that look beautiful. Caught the depth of their bond. The words came from the heart and beautiful, as she remembered Dylan as the unclean feeling, the most important stranger whose eyes are bluer than Robin. Steve Jobs was immediately drawn to eggs because of Baez's smarts and charm. Soon, friendship turned into a major relationship that lasted 3 years. Jobs even thought about getting married, but she paused because she knew he wanted a family, which isn't possible with Baez, who already had a teen child, son. A memorable event happened at a Ralph Lauren store when Jobs told him Baez should wear a bright red dress. The time she said she couldn't afford, he bought it for her without after some thought. There was Kim Jones being linked to a woman named Kim, was not often seen at the time. But Baez openly talked about it during a 1972 interview and brought up the subject again in the 2023 film I Am a Noise. Kim demonstrated a free spirit, not interested in what people think. Baez thought of the two of them walking around town wearing boots, suspenders, and a sweater and messy hair, making them look like bad guys. This relationship gave Baez a new way of looking at love, one that felt good after what she had been through with guys. She thought that leaving this out, some of her story from her autobiography, would have been dishonest. Even now, Joan Baez keeps going up the tree behind him a lot at her house in the summer as it goes to sleep in its trees, calling the event magical. She can feel the birds when they fly close, the wind from their wings. She once, when they came down, they fell and hurt in an accident that needed a trip to the hospital, but she still likes the tree more than, as she puts it, seeing a doctor. Every morning, I talk to a tree. Baez moves without shoes on even though she is in her 80s. 15 minutes, she moves to the beat of the Gypsy Kings, letting go of everything, something else in her mind, she says. It makes her feel better and keeps her centered. In 2020, she had a one-woman art show, an exhibition with images of fight for freedom and rights who were well liked. By 2021, she set up a second show featuring figures. Some of them are Kamala Harris, Greta Thunberg, Dr. Fauci named her picture of Fauci. A lot of people looked at Trust Internet. Through her art, she kept up her long-term search for justice, but with a different form of media. The documentary coming out in 2023, Joan Baez' I Am a Noise, found stories she had never revealed before. She told the truth about how she was abused as a child, as her father beat her and read. A lot of these songs are very personal. During her therapy, she wrote songs meetings in the 1990s and did so because of by different parts of her personality. Is it better to focus on gossip or love entanglements? In her writing deals with memories of childhood, some of them were healing and mental growth. Is a polite poem with a subtle tone about Bob Dylan that is only a fey.